Hi. Have you ever wondered what autism is? What are the signs? What do you look for? How do you know if your child has autism? Today, Meghan Graham will tell us her story about autism. She's a mom of two, and wow, she's got a journey to tell you about.
Explorations. Probing global diversification. We travel the world so you don't have to.
Remember how you felt. Remember how you felt.
All right, so maybe we can start then by getting the story of how you first found out about autism. Was it because your son had it, or did you even think about it before?
Prior to figuring out that my son had autism, it was not on our radar. Special needs as a general issue was on my radar because my brother's special needs. But prior to actually discovering or putting the dots together for my son, had no knowledge of autism at all.
So did you actually then live with him for a while before you started getting some clues that something wasn't quite right?
Yeah, at about 18 months old was when my now ex-husband had actually figured out that it was autism. I'm not sure how he figured it out, but once he pointed out the behaviors, that's when I actually started realizing what was going on. And a lot of the behaviors that he saw was that he wasn't making eye contact, and I hadn't noticed that because he was only making eye contact with me. He had actually started speaking between the twins because he has a twin sister, and then he had stopped. And then his twin sister kept on going with her speech. He was lining up all of his toys, and he would use us. He would take us by the hand and move our hand to point to something that he wanted instead of him pointing himself. He actually only started pointing about 2 years ago, and he's 8.5 now.
Wow. Now it sounds to me then you're saying that he was actually treating your husband and yourself differently?
Yes. Yeah, only from the standpoint of making eye contact.
Oh, I see.
Everything else was generalized across the board for anybody that he was with, except for the eye contact thing. And that's why I hadn't noticed it, because he still made eye contact with me no matter what.
Your relationship with your husband, do you think ultimately that played any role in like autism? I guess we should get into what it is exactly, whether it's a genetic thing or whether it's some kind of whether it's hereditary or whether it's somehow based on an environmental situation. But I guess just getting back to the question, your relationship between you and your husband, did that play any kind of role into his development of autism, do you think?
I mean, the breakdown of the marriage, autism wasn't the reason for the breakdown of the marriage, but it definitely was a stressor towards it. I've heard over the years that there's actually an 80% divorce rate among the autism community. I have not seen that to be true, but it's a statistic that's put around out there, and I don't actually know where it came from initially, but there is a very high divorce rate amongst the special needs community and specifically autism.
So what did you do then? What was your first reaction when you finally decided, okay, I think we have autism on our hands here?
First thing was to go to the family doctor and ask for a referral to a pediatrician, because we had chosen to just remain with our family doctor rather than having a pediatrician originally, like a lot of other families do, primarily because we trusted our family doctor and we liked him, and there was really no reason to start afresh with another doctor. He was very, very hesitant initially, And he actually told me that because my son was the male twin and not the dominant twin, then if he's still not speaking by the time he's 3 years old, come back and we'll talk again. And I'm like, no. He's 18 months old. He's displaying all of these behaviors. He was the first one between the twins to start talking, and then he stopped and hasn't continued. This isn't right. And my gut feeling was telling me this, like, I've got to keep pushing for this. So I actually then sent my ex-husband in. He was my husband at the time, to chat with him kind of man to man. And he came out with the referral. And then I had to actually follow up with the referral because a month goes by and still there's no referral date or specific referral date that's been set up for an appointment with a pediatrician. And it took about 6 months after that initial referral to actually get in to see the pediatrician. And then about a month after that, the pediatrician went on mat leave.
Wow.
And we kind of fell between the cracks and had a follow-up appointment with the pediatrician about a year after the initial appointment. And I'd been calling and going, where's the referral to the developmental team at McMaster? And nobody could answer. Nobody in the office could answer until I went in for the follow-up appointment with the student pediatrician that was kind of covering the load while she was off on mat leave. And that's when that pediatrician actually looked into it for me and came back and said, oops, fell through the cracks. Are you kidding me? It's only my child. So it took another 3 or 4 months to actually be seen by the developmental team at McMaster. And from there, it was my son was about 3.5 years old by the time he actually got diagnosis, and I started the fight at 18 months old.
Wow. So now that you've had some time with it and you've learned about it, do you think that the fact that they were kind of foot dragging in your case, would this be typical of a diagnosis of autism?
I think the process that we went through is not typical. The fighting for it, the keeping your file current and top of mind, and really being able to push through and not just say, oh, well, it's a wait list for 3 years, come back to us in 3 years. That's very standard.
When you had him as when he was born,
Yes.
and the early development of your son, did you have any inkling at all that something was a little bit off?
Not until they were about 1.5 years old, and we're lucky from the standpoint, and it sounds weird, but we had another baby to compare to.
Okay.
Right? Because he's a twin. So he and his twin sister, I noticed that he was behind her by about a month developmentally for certain things, and other things just, he kind of did it totally differently than she did, but I put it down to gender differences. But it wasn't really until the starting speaking and then stopping. That was the real red flag for us.
So, there are certain processes and things that kids go through after they're born, ultrasounds, things like that, to determine if they're healthy and whatnot. I would imagine that since they were twins, if something like an ultrasound, for instance, would have affected one, it would probably have affected both, right?
Yes, and that's the thing. They both got the exact same nutrients in utero. They both got all the same number of ultrasounds. They can't do one side of my belly and not the other. We had, because it was twins, it was considered to be a high-risk pregnancy, as any multiples pregnancy is. Also, with me being adopted and not having a medical history for me, it was also considered to be a high-risk pregnancy. But throughout my pregnancy, I was textbook. Except for at 23 weeks, we did have a bit of a scare. And as it turned out, I had just been working too much and just had pushed myself too much. And basically they said, you need to calm down and you need to stop working 10 hours a day and take a rest and, look after yourself because you're pregnant with twins. But all the ultrasounds showed they were growing normally. I think we definitely had 2. I can't remember if we had 3. And when I was 30 weeks along, my OB actually complained that she was bored with my pregnancy because it was so textbook. I even gained only 40 pounds with twins. People didn't notice that I was pregnant till I was about 5 months along because I'm very tall at 5'10", so there's a lot of space in me to actually hold 2 babies.
Wow.
The difference that I felt with them in utero was that my daughter was very, very, very active. She was constantly moving all the time. And especially when like Latin music or salsa music was playing, then I'd have to actually sit down because she would knock me over. She was moving so much. And even today, she's very responsive to music. And he was actually a very calm baby. So if I hadn't felt him move in a couple hours, I would eat a piece of chocolate and then he'd just kind of go, and he'd turn a bit, and that was it. So they were very different in utero as they are outside of utero.
So,
sorry.
That's okay. So how has it been getting used to it? I mean, obviously you've reached a point now where you're an can I call you an activist for autism? Somebody who's out there to make sure that people understand exactly what's going on with this illness. But when you were first introduced to it, were you afraid? Were you scared? Were you determined that this wasn't going to screw up your life in any way? How did you approach that?
Well, interestingly, because my brother is special needs, I didn't go through as big of a learning curve as my then husband did. And I mean, he's a very, very intelligent man, but it was a language that until you're exposed to it with all the different acronyms that are happening, you really don't know anything about it. And I didn't realize how much I had learned just through osmosis with my brother, and that he would go to an appointment and have to figure out what they had been saying, whereas I could just kind of continue along with the specialist as to what they were saying for the most part, because special needs is pretty much standard across the board as to what the additional needs are for those children. Things that are autism specific, yes, I had to research, I had to go through all of that, but I actually had a career where I had to learn all of this stuff anyway. I used to be a fundraiser, and primarily I worked for organizations that were raising money for medical issues. So it was almost like I just went straight into that work mode to learn everything. And I did actually have to stop myself after a while because, as it's known through the autism community, is that we all start to do workshop whoring, where we're going through and we're taking every single workshop and conference and anything that we can possibly get our hands on and all that information, and it's completely overwhelming. And I found it to be very different when I'm researching for a job that I have versus my child. But it didn't really hit me from an emotional standpoint until I actually had to pull my daughter out of French immersion. Because the one thing that I had wanted as a parent for my children is to actually be in French immersion. So with my son having autism, I knew he couldn't do French immersion. I was okay with that because my daughter could do it. Well, she ended up being diagnosed many years later with anxiety disorder, and the French just put her anxiety through the roof. So it was when I had to pull her out of French immersion last year and put her into the English stream that's when my son's diagnosis of autism really hit me, from an emotional standpoint rather than a logical standpoint, because now the one thing that I had always wanted as a parent was French immersion, and that wasn't an option for either of my children. I mean, they're both great my daughter's great in school now. She's A's and B's. Everything's fine in English. But that was the one piece that I had always wanted as a parent. So it was strange that, you have to fast forward 4 years for me to actually go emotionally, oh no, what do I do with autism? because up until then I was just logic.
So what have you done then? Obviously, you have two kids there that have to be treated differently.
Mhm. Well, as you would with any family that has two different children, right? They're not going to be
The
the
same,
same
yeah.
for anything, right? But our schooling, the education system for both of them are very different. My daughter's is not as different as it is for anyone else going into grade 3, which is what she's in. But we just, for example, signed off on her individualized education plan because she's a little bit behind in her reading and writing comprehension. Not a big deal, right? She just needs a little bit extra support for that. My son, however, with him having autism and originally being diagnosed with severe autism, he ended up qualifying for what's IBI therapy, which is intensive behavioral intervention therapy. And that turned into 24 hours a week of speech, language, behavioral, occupational, and cognitive therapy. So he would go to school 1 day a week on Mondays, and then Tuesday through Friday during school hours, he was in specific therapies at McMaster. And so he actually just finished that. He was in that for 2.5 years. And now he's actually back in full-time school in an autism-specific class, which means that they're able to actually cater to his needs. And right now they're trying to determine where he is academically, because although technically he's in grade 3, he's never actually really been in an academic setting. So they're trying to find out where he is in his math skills, in his science skills, in his reading skills, in his English skills, all of the different subjects that you have in school. They're trying to figure out where he is now and assessing his capabilities and his current level for that.
How aware, how aware do you think he is of his condition?
I actually don't know. I know that I would imagine that he's aware that things are different for him, but it's also just been the way that it's always been for him. Right? So he's in class with other kids that are very similar to him, that have different needs on the autism spectrum, because of course if you've met one kid with autism, you've only met one child with autism. Everybody is different. There's some similar behaviors, but how far those behaviors kind of create their awareness is very different.
Are you happy with the way society has dealt with autism?
That's a loaded question. At the end of the day, it sounds really crude, but I don't care what society thinks. What I care about is how our circle around us deals with it. And if you want to be part of our circle, if you want to interact with my little family, then really you have to be aware. And I'm not asking people to be experts. I actually encourage people to ask me questions. But when my son is having a meltdown in the middle of the mall, I don't care that strangers are staring at me. I don't care that they're thinking that I'm a bad parent, because they all are. All that I care about at that very moment is keeping my son and everybody around him safe. Because that should be my focus, is just dealing with him. Originally, I'll admit, yes, okay, it was difficult. I would be concerned about how they viewed my parenting, but at the end of the day, I don't care. But it's also taken me a very long time to get there, to that stage where I can just deal with the meltdown and not pay attention to the staring and the looks and the what's wrong with your kid. There's nothing wrong with my child. He just gets overwhelmed with everything around him. And you having your emotional reaction to it is not helping. So please just give us some space.
Piss off.
Well, that's the short way of saying it.
You get to the point a lot faster.
Yeah.
I mean, every parent who has a child wants the best for their child, and it doesn't matter what seems to happen to kids. Generally, parents are forgiving of their situation. How do you feel about your situation right now as it stands? You're obviously accepting his situation as well.
Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, this is our family, this is our family unit, and this is this is our reality. I mean, sure, there are days when I miss being able to work outside the home. I miss my old paycheck. And I've lost friends through both my son being diagnosed and divorce, as it happens for any divorce. But as it stands right now, I have a great support network around me, that although they may come in and go, I don't know what to do, but I know how to make your tea properly. So they'll go and make my tea properly so that I can still concentrate on my son. And they're not scared of breaking him, which is a big component to it. So we've got a great support network around us. And really, I mean, it takes a community to raise, or a village to raise a child, right? And our family is exemplary of that.
How have your views towards autism changed from the moment that you discovered your son had it to now?
I don't shut up about it.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, basically everything that I did in my former career, I now get to do to advocate for my own children. Sometimes it's harder from an emotional standpoint to be able to do that, because, things need to change right now in the system in order to help my child. But logically, I also know that, funding needs to keep up. Funding takes a long time to get from a government standpoint. So there's a really big disconnect in my world between this needs to happen now to be able to support my son versus the government being able to release the funding to be able to give more early intervention for kids, to be able to support more kids once they're out of IBI therapy, because it's also only just a very small few that qualify for IBI. So what happens to the other 90% of kids that all have autism but don't qualify for IBI? I mean, what's the funding available for that? Now that we're outside of that little IBI bubble, as I call it, you basically can contact your local ABA therapy, which is applied behavior analysis therapy, and you can only work on one issue at a time. So if my son's headbanging again and screeching, and he's got night terrors, I have to choose between those three behaviors in order to get help for one of them, because the process is set up that they will only deal with one issue at a time. And then you can deal with that for a month and a half, and then you have to move on to the next issue.
I'm wondering why, because aren't these issues sort of intertwined?
They are, and you can talk with your caseworkers and your therapists about all three issues, but from a documentation standpoint, they can only focus on one of those key issues. But if you have it in the documentation that he's displaying those three behaviors all at one time, then it's easier to move on to the next behavior after you've dealt with that in that one specific time frame.
So is the government being kind of hard-assed about this, do you think, generally, in terms of autism? Or maybe in a wider spectrum with other illnesses as well?
I think it's just they can't keep up. I mean, when we started this journey, when my son was 18 months old and he's now 8.5 years old, the statistics were 1 in 150. Right now, if you go based off of the CDC's numbers that were released 2 weeks ago, it's 1 in 68. Now, I have issue with that number because it's not based off of diagnosis information across the states. It's based off of some diagnosis information in only 8 states in the United States. But even if you set aside how legitimate or non-legitimate that statistic is, at the end of the day, the increase of autism is rising so quickly that money just cannot keep up.
You were talking earlier about the fact that you really didn't care what other people thought if you were in a situation where your son was doing something that someone else might find strange.
Yes.
How about you? How do you cope with that? Okay, I mean, you generally is it weigh on you at all, or or as you say, do you just kind of proceed with what you have to do?
The future weighs on me a lot. And I find I can't let myself get too far in the future because I don't know what that's going to look like for him. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to live forever. And as it stands now, his life skills are extremely behind. And the question is whether or not he'll be able to actually look after himself at a future date to be able to live on his own. He is also a very, very tall child. He takes after his mom. So at 8.5 years old, he comes up almost to my chin, and I'm 5'10", and he's 100 pounds of solid.
Wow.
So I mean, I would be shocked if he's less than 6'1", 6'2" by the time he's full grown. And that is a lot of child who's an adult that may or may not be able to look after himself from a day-to-day standpoint. And if I think too far down the road about that, that's when I get extremely overwhelmed because I just don't know what it's going to look like. I have a feeling that he's going to have a job, that he'll be able to find an employer that can put up with his quirks on the job site, primarily because there are some fantastic companies now that are starting to recognize how fantastic adults with autism can be and how very task-oriented they can be. And, you have to remind them at the end of the day, it's time to go home now because they get so zoned in on the task that they're working on at hand. There's actually a new company in the prairies and they're a placement company specifically for adults on the spectrum. And they act as a mediary between the adult on the spectrum and also the employer. So they do all the assessments to determine job-ready skills for that specific person, present those to the employer, and also explain to the employer what being on the autism spectrum means. So it's stuff like they're not going to be able to stand at the water cooler every day and just do idle chit-chat. They're going to come into their desk, they're going to do their job, and they're going to leave, because they're very task-oriented. So my hope is later on that those will be in place and more standardized across the board so that he will be able to earn an income for himself and be self-sustaining that way. But he's going to probably need help with life skills. And that's where it gets a little overwhelming for me because I don't know if physically I'll be able to do that when I'm 70.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, the future is a big concern. Well, the unknown, but do we know whether people with autism actually improve, whether the condition improves, or whether they can even grow out of it? Is that possible?
I don't like the idea of growing out of it. I think they learn techniques to actually move beyond where they currently are. So they will learn, for example, when somebody says, "Hi, Mike, how are you?" They will learn, "I'm good, how are you?" is a standard response to that question. Whereas if they don't learn that, they just sit there going, "Why are you talking to me? I don't want to do idle chit chat." So the more early intervention, the better, because then there's that understanding of how social interactions happen and what the social cues are, because these kids need to learn those in order to function appropriately in society later on.
So, considering the way things are now, then it's up to you to keep an eye out and make sure that he tries to get as much input from you as possible
Yes.
to foresee future situations under those circumstances.
Yes, because we even need to teach them how to play. Because our kids on the spectrum, for example, if they're going to be playing with a whole bunch of cars, like little tiny dinky car things, they're going to line them up in rows or color code them or do them by size. they're not going to sit there and go vroom vroom with the car. We have to teach them that, because they just see it completely differently than what the standard approach from society requires them to be.
What about research in the medical community? How are things coming along there in terms of treatment of autism?
There's a lot of brand new hypotheses about what the latest cause of autism is. I'll admit that I really don't stay that current with it. There's stuff like the age of the father is a key factor. The age of the grandfather is a key factor. I'm not sure how that works, but how many ultrasounds you had, whether or not there's fluoride in the water, the number of ultrasounds that you had, whether you're a refrigerator mother or not. All these different things. And one that I saw on a Facebook group last night was somebody apparently said that all kids with autism were born early and underweight. Well, yeah, my kids were born early at 35 weeks gestation, but they were the size of singleton babies coming out of me. My son was 6 pounds, 5 ounces. My daughter was 5 pounds, 9 ounces. And if you look in the newspaper, that's a standard size baby. So I'm actually glad they didn't go full term, because then they would have been about, who knows, 8-10 pounds each. My stepdaughter, who is my ex-husband's older daughter, she was a healthy weight as well, and she was, standard gestation time, and she has Asperger's. So I know there's a lot of discussions around vaccines and everything after pregnancy. And yes, my children were vaccinated. And yes, they will continue to be vaccinated, because that's the choice that I've made as well. No, I don't think vaccines caused my son's autism. And no, I don't think, both of my kids were vaccinated. So how come he has it and she doesn't? So I'm pro-vaccine. We'll just put that out there.
Pro-vaccine. How do things like diet and nutrition affect autism and where it goes? Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people in the autism community have had great success with removing gluten from their diet, primarily because those are the children that have what's called leaky gut syndrome. I don't know the medical behind it all, but basically gluten doesn't react well with their stomachs, and then produces a whole bunch of toxins, and the toxins have caused problems and a lot of autistic behaviors. I have not noticed that in my son. So we're not gluten-free in our family. But I know a lot of people in the autism community are gluten-free and casein-free. It's a huge commitment from a parent's standpoint to be able to cook gluten-free and casein-free. And at the end of the day, I really don't like cooking. But also gluten doesn't seem to bother my son. One thing that I do find his behaviors change is when he's had red dye, which is really hard on him when one of his favorite candies is Swedish berries, the little red Swedish berries.
Right.
So, a big treat is that I'll let him have one, maybe two of those, and then that's it, because there's just too many behaviors that happen after that, and his cheeks get all red, and he starts stimming a lot more than when he doesn't have red dye. But red dye also seems to be in everything, so at least he can have it in little bits. I've never had him allergy tested, because I don't know how they would do that with him. Because he won't sit down, he won't do any of that stuff that a kid can do to get pricked on. I understand it's on their arms now rather than on their backs, but he won't sit down for that kind of stuff. So if we have to get him allergy tested at some point in time in the future, then I will. But until I have to, I don't want to put him through that. So.
Well, you're obviously very actively involved in all of this. Do you feel that you get enough support?
From a government standpoint or from a personal standpoint?
Well, I guess you could look at it from a government standpoint and also from, your family, friends, neighbors, that kind of thing. Yeah, from a personal standpoint.
From a personal standpoint, absolutely. We have a very close-knit friends and family base that really get that things are different in my family. They may not know exactly how they're different, but they get it. And they understand that, I probably haven't slept the night before because of him. So they understand if I'm a little tired all the time. From a government standpoint, I think we were lucky, for lack of a better term, that he was diagnosed as severely disabled or severe autism, because then that meant that we qualified for the IBI therapy and we qualified for this autism specific class, because there's only 12 kids in his class. Well, but there's 200 families here in town that I'm aware of. So for him to be one of those 12, we're the lucky ones to be in this class. But one of our neighbors, for example, her son is on the spectrum and he is not severe enough. So he's in mainstream school with an EA, and he's supposed to have full-time EA, which is educational assistance. But funding doesn't keep up. He doesn't have it. He has it part-time only. And his big issue that he has is transitioning. So transitioning between classrooms, from outside school to inside school, and he can have a flat-out meltdown. And that meltdown could last, 5 minutes to hours or the full school day. And if it happens on a day when he doesn't have that extra support as an educational assistant, then it's just too bad.
So there are times when these kinds of things happen, and there's nothing that can be done about it, at least in the immediate future or in the immediacy of the situation. What about what was I going to ask now? It slipped out of my mind. I've done too many interviews today, I guess.
That's okay.
That's okay. I was just going to ask you about the fact that, this is something that obviously is going to be a part of your life until you drift off into another world, and you have to be accepting of this, I guess. How do you look at your kid? How do you see him as an entity and a member of your family and a part of your life?
He's my baby. All three of the kids, they're my kids, Yeah, okay, there are some days, I won't lie, that it frankly sucks, because it would be nice to be still working outside the house and earning that same salary that I used to be and that recognition, and I loved my career. But at the end of the day, my kids are more important. What do they say when on your deathbed? Nobody ever said that, they wish they would have worked harder. At least on my deathbed, I know that my kids will be there and they'll be like, you know what, Mom? You were there for us the whole time. And yeah, okay, our reality looks very different from other people's reality, but it's the way it is. And I can either sit there and think, oh, woe is me all the time. Why did I get this lot in life? How did I draw the short straw? But at the end of the day, I did draw the short straw because I'm strong enough to deal with it. And I'm loud enough and don't stop talking enough to actually get things done and to be their biggest advocate and to get what is needed for them. I have to make sure that my knowledge is high enough, because I know, for example, my technological knowledge stopped when I stopped working outside the home. And that was 4.5 years ago now, pre-iPad. Okay?
Right.
And our kids on the spectrum, iPad is everything to them, right? And I know that my own knowledge of the iPad and, frankly, my fear of breaking this very expensive tool that is so key for my son is almost holding him back. So I've actually been on, the wait list for the iPad training locally and all this kind of stuff. And I finally got up on the wait list, and then I was sick with the flu. The day that the workshop was being held, I didn't get to go. So I've been waiting for 3 years to get my knowledge up to be able to be autism specific and learning how to work these specific autism friendly apps. And I was off with the flu for the first time all winter. Like, I really wanted to drag myself in there, but my 103 fever would not allow it. So back
Tough
on the wait list I
situation,
go,
yeah.
right? So it's a reality that I need to keep learning in order to keep up with them.
Do you, when you're in sort of a dark moment, when you kind of wish, you could get away from it, do you actually try and physically do something about that, or are you just not able to?
I drink a lot of chai. Chai is my moment, because sometimes it's all you can get in one day is, that one sip of chai. I do go to yoga once a week to be able to kind of recenter that way. But again, I haven't been to yoga in 3 weeks now because I've been off sick. And it sounds really weird, but journaling really does help because it gets that clutter out of your brain and it doesn't have to stay in there anymore and just clutter it all up. It's out, it's done, it's cleared up some of your brain. So that is a big help for me. And then just trying to get back to the logic of what's going on.
Do you feel that you need to help others who have a similar situation to you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm very lucky from the standpoint of what I used to do for a living because I already knew the advocacy language. So and because of my training, I also understand the medical information. So I know that there are a lot of parents that, the doctor will be talking away, and they're just like, I have no idea what you're saying. Or any of the school board specialists, because everybody's talking in a lot of acronyms. And when you're new to this, it's way too much. So I actually, a girlfriend of mine brought me in for her school board meeting a few weeks ago, or about a month ago now, because they've only been on this journey for about a year now. And she's like, every time they're talking, I don't understand, and I have to ask them to repeat things, and then I can see that their frustration levels are getting up there. And so I walked into the meeting. I could keep up with what they were all saying and the terms that they were using. And then I could translate it for her and her husband afterwards when we went out for coffee after that, right? But at least the specialists were able to just keep going, which then they feel better and they feel that then the parents are on board with everything and it just keeps them happy. So that then the parents and I could figure it out afterwards.
Is there anything that you think that we could have talked about that we didn't? That any point that you'd like to bring up about this subject?
Well, I actually spoke at a Rotary Club a month and a half ago now, and I asked the question to people who like my Facebook page and follow me on Twitter. What's the one message that you want out there for people that aren't in this community? And the big one that they all turned around and said was, if you've met one child with autism, you've only met one. And remember that a child with autism becomes an adult with autism.
Right.
It doesn't just stop, it keeps on going. So those supports that are currently in place for a child usually stop at age 18. That doesn't mean that the behaviors stop and that they don't need the support after 18 years old.
I was just thinking, do autistic people actually get married and have kids? Is that possible?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Usually with a very, very understanding spouse.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of people or a lot of parents that have their children diagnosed with autism turn around and discover, oh, maybe this is me actually, and then they get assessed and find out that they actually are on the spectrum as well, and finally go, oh my goodness, now I understand why I had so many problems with this and this and this, and not understanding the social cues and everything. But then there's other ones like myself that aren't, that I sit there going, I don't understand why you're doing this. Because I'm not on the spectrum, but my biggest resource is actually my stepdaughter. We've done an interview with her as well, and she is 19 years old, and she actually got diagnosis after her brother did, even though he's 10 years younger than she is. But I I can say to her, I don't understand. Why is he doing this? And she'll kind of take a look at the situation and go, oh, it's because of this. So I can kind of cheat that way in that I've got that personal resource right there. But, they haven't actually proven that there's a specific genetic or genetic reason for autism. There are a lot of, there probably is a genetic reason to it kind of study, but nothing's been completely determined yet. But rarely do you have one child in a family with autism and no other children.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Very interesting to talk to you again.
Thank you. You too, Dzintars.
And we'll do.
So, did you learn something about autism? For more information about Meghan Graham, or if you want to talk to her about anything, go to her blog site at imamom2.wordpress.com. For Explorations, I'm Nina Hilger. Here, go.